All right, welcome to episode 3 of Shag's Celtic Culture Corner. So today's topic, somebody on Facebook asked me, I think what actually is a very good question, which is like, what is Celtic? Or that was kind of the big question that we got to in our discussion. And like the answer, whether you are familiar with kind of Celtic culture or not, the answer might surprise you just a little bit. It's a little different than what a lot of people think. So before we dive into that, I'm going to explain to you what I am and what I am not when it comes to history. So I am not a professor. I am not a PhD. I do hold a bachelor's degree currently, and in about a month here, I will have my master's degree in history. The emphasis of that has been on the British Isles, but a little bit more modern than what we're talking about, mostly the 17th and 18th centuries. So if I do get something wrong, it is entirely possible. I would love anything that you guys catch that's incorrect. Please mention it in the comments. And then, that's a great way to kind of have discussions over these sorts of things. So when we're thinking about Celtic culture, usually, we're thinking of kind of those big Celtic groups, right? The Irish, the Scots, the Manx, and the Welsh. But the Celts themselves actually, as a culture, originate in Central Europe around, before 500 BC, but they start expanding at about 500 BC. And then they're actually going to spread over to some places that, if you're not familiar with this Celtic heritage, that you might not expect. So they migrate to the Iberian Peninsula, modern day Spain and Portugal. They become the Gauls, those group of supposed barbarians that Julius Caesar and the Romans fought against for so long. And then, of course, they will also make their way first over to Ireland, and then through migration in the first few centuries A.D., they will make it over to Scotland. Scotland's actually named after this group that had come over, what the Romans called the Scoti. So Scotland actually means land of the Irish in a way. But Celtic culture is centered around some of these, linguistically, these like core, this like kind of Celtic language group. So it is where we do get Gaelic from, though Gaelic itself is not the original Celtic language. It's been changed and adapted over the years. So Gaelic is kind of a subset of Celtic culture, because when you're talking about Gaelic, then you are talking more specifically about Ireland and Scotland, though the broad term Celtic now includes that as well. So the Celtic culture spread from Central Europe over the first few centuries. There actually were people living in Ireland before the Celtic invasion, which was around 500 BC. We don't know very much about them. You can go and see carvings and paintings and things by them. There are some burial mounds, but they didn't have a written language that we can understand. They had symbols and things, and historians have come across. Have generated some theories about what those different symbols mean, but nobody actually knows. So what happens is that, so for one, obviously one of the reasons that Celtic culture today we see so much as being centered around Scotland, Ireland, Wales, and the Isle of Man is because most of these other areas that had Celtic cultures and Celtic peoples in them were conquered by Rome, right? So Julius Caesar, through his conquest of Gaul, expansion into Iberia, both during the Punic Wars, the wars between Rome and Carthage, and in the aftermath of the establishment of the empire, where some of those boundaries get expanded, and Rome's power in like Iberia, for example, is reinforced. So, but what happens in so the Romans never go to Ireland. They're aware of it. They never go there militarily, I should say. St. Patrick himself was actually a Roman who brings Catholicism to Ireland. So there's still a strong connection there. But Rome conquers modern day England and Wales, but doesn't expand into Scotland for a few reasons. So the group that's living there at the time, a group known as the Picts, which is from the Latin picti, meaning painted ones, are the original inhabitants of Scotland. And they're called the Painted Ones because they were famous for running into battle painted in blue, kind of like you see in Braveheart. But also the other thing they were famous for was fighting completely in the nude. So maybe that scared the Romans off. That definitely sounds terrifying to me. But a lot of it, too, comes from the fact that they kind of waged this guerrilla war on the Romans as they tried to invade Scotland, or what the Romans called Caledonia, which is why you might hear that as another term for Scotland. But they have this kind of guerrilla campaign. They're slowly kind of picking away, whittling away at the Roman legions. And really, Scotland doesn't have the kinds of natural resources that are appealing to the Romans. So it kind of becomes this thing where they're putting all these military resources into it, and it's really not panning out. And I think some of it, now this may just be my conjecture, but it's probably that failed invasion in Scotland, and kind of the fizzling out of things in Britain. Like southern Britain continues to be a Roman colony until the 5th century, but it doesn't have a lot of draw, a lot of appeal, and that's probably why, even though the Romans knew that Ireland was there, it's probably the reason that they never launched an invasion of it. They probably assumed, and there are a lot of similarities, right, between the geography of Scotland and Ireland, that they would probably run into some of the same problems there, especially after the Scoti emigration. They knew who they would find there, and that may have dissuaded them as well. So that's one of the reasons why Scotland and Ireland retain such a unique version of this Celtic culture that then through the centuries undergoes these transformations into what we think of today. But things like the Celtic knot, things like certainly aspects of their language stem from this much older Celtic culture that manages to survive because these are the groups who are not kind of put under the foot of Rome and forced to like convert pieces of their culture to Rome. They had a polytheistic religion, so the original Celtic religion has many different gods. It's very much a pagan religion centered around nature. There's, the influence of the Druids, who are kind of the high priests in this. And you'll find that pre-Roman Southern Britain is very Celtic as well. It's just that after the Roman conquests and after the failed revolt by Queen Boudica, Britain does begin to Romanize and loses a little bit of that Celtic flavor. In Wales, because of the mountains that separate Wales from England, the Romans didn't interfere with them as much, and so Wales retained much more of its language, much more of its Celtic culture as a result of that as well. So the main point I think I'm trying to get across is that when we're thinking of Celtic culture, it's really what is left after Romanization. It's a response. the Celtic culture as we think of it today is what survives from actually this pre-Roman Empire, Roman imperial version of Europe. So I would love if you guys have any questions, please leave them in the comments or hit me up on Facebook. There's a lot more to go into than I have right here, but I think this is kind of a good start at answering that question, and it really requires you to look back much further than a lot of people think that you need to. Most people think that a lot of the aspects of like Celtic heritage and culture really start to develop in the Middle Ages, and they do transform, but the original Celtic culture is actually very, very ancient and not indigenous to Ireland and Scotland. It actually comes from the area today that is like southern Germany and Austria and areas like that. So, like I said, if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. Please subscribe to our channel. We are still in the middle of our Kickstarter for Glass to Mouth. We're about $500 away from finishing that. So please, if you have the ability, donate. If you don't, please give us a share. That really helps us out too. A lot of people don't hear about our Kickstarter and they'd be willing to donate. So make sure that you share that out. Until next time, have a wonderful day and sláinte.